Kevin Yoder, who was our congressperson from the 3rd District, is a member of Church of the Resurrection as well. And he and I had multiple conversations over the years about the pain of having people say things on social media about you that weren't true, or the kinds of questioning of your motives and your integrity that happens in the political process. And sometimes it happens in the religious process as well, the religious world. And so I just want to commend you for, putting up with that, for being willing to tolerate that. And part of what I'd remind you of before we jump into how do we navigate civil discourse is just to say that if you look at the Bible and you look throughout history, every great leader knew what it was like to experience opposition and criticism and sometimes anger and hate. So I was going back through and recounting this when I spoke at President Obama's inauguration. I reminded him of Moses, who had just led the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. So this is like this huge thing, and the Red Sea had parted, and this is like the most amazing thing that could possibly happen.
Do I put my email address?
And as Moses has done this, he's led them out to the Sinai, and as he's out in the Sinai, one of the first things that happens is the people don't like the food, and they're not happy with his leadership, and they don't like the Sinai. And I've been to the Sinai twice. If you've ever been there, you can understand why they were not happy about leaving, the part of Egypt where they were, where everything was green, and living in the Sinai. And some of the key leaders decide that they want to kill Moses and they want to go back to Egypt, because at least there they had leeks and cucumbers and meat pots, flesh pots. And Moses goes out to pray. And when he goes out to pray, he says, "God, please kill me now." I mean, literally, this is what he says in Hebrew. Just kill me now. I don't want to do this anymore. And God says, "No, you got to put your big boy." He doesn't say it in these words, but put your big boy clothes back on. And you need to go out there and keep leading. And I think about Elijah the prophet, who went and had this encounter with the prophets of Baal on the top of Mount Carmel, and it was this dramatic victory for him. And instantly, the queen and king want to kill him. And he ends up fleeing to the Sinai, and there he prays, "God, I don't want to live anymore. I want to die." I mean, you got two major biblical leaders who actually wanted to die because it was too hard to keep going on. And I think sometimes you probably feel that way too. I talk about this to pastors on a regular basis, that every pastor I know feels like quitting sometime. They all feel like giving up because it's been too hard. They're tired of the criticism and the pain. And I think about, for those of you who are Christians, this is Holy Week, and I think about Jesus. And one of the passages I tell pastors to look at and remember is John 6:66. So you think about 666, it's pretty easy to memorize or remember. John 6:66 says this: "Many of Jesus' disciples turned away. They'd heard what he taught about the feeding of the multitudes, and I am the bread of life, and they turned away at that point." And if that was true of Jesus' disciples, it's going to be true even of your constituents, the people in your community who are not going to be happy with you all the time. And I find we've lost thousands of members over the years and gained tens of thousands of members. We have, every month it seems like I get a letter from somebody who's mad, upset, leaving the church. And when I was younger, that was more painful. At 55, I don't feel like it bothers me quite as much, but even now there are times where it's hurtful or painful, and you get letters that criticize and question your motives and your integrity. And in the midst of that, it helps me to remember Jesus was criticized, Moses was criticized, Elijah was criticized. And I think about every great leader throughout history has experienced the same thing. And so I just, I want to encourage you, the leaders who make a difference are the ones who don't give up. So don't give up. Hang in there. Don't give up, and keep trying to do the right thing. And I always find when people are criticizing me, I try to listen. I try to hear, okay, is there something valid in what they're saying? Sometimes they were just having a bad day. Sometimes we're just going to disagree. I want to see, okay, is there something valid to what they're saying? And it might make me a better leader if I can actually hear the critique of the person who is criticizing me. And so listening really is an important part in that process of being a leader, I think. So I want to shift gears and just move into this idea of a bit of civil discourse, but also a bit of a place where I have tried to stand as a pastor, and where I think many of you also stand. The early Methodists were characterized by something called in Latin the via media, or the middle way. Anglicans or Episcopalians, same thing. The via media recognized that often the truth was found somewhere between this and that. And so often we migrate towards the right or towards the left, towards a particular political party or theological stance. But if you find large numbers of people who are thoughtful, who disagree about something, it may be that there's truth on both sides of the issue, whatever it might be. There's something valuable to hear, some legitimate concern for somebody, somebody who's in a different place than I am. And the via media tries to listen in solving problems or addressing issues. It tries to listen to people on both sides and tries to find the greatest possible truth. And so in my own life, what that looks like when it comes to, say, politics or theology is people ask me, I can't figure you out, Adam. Are you liberal or conservative? And my answer is always the same. Yes, of course. And they go, no, no, no. Which are you, liberal or conservative? And I said, do I have to pick? Because I think those are both pretty good terms. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, the word liberal means to be generous in spirit, to be open to reform, to seeing things with new eyes. That sounds like a pretty good idea to me. To be conservative means to conserve values and things that are treasures. They may not be popular or in style today, but they're still values that we hold on to. And to not be conserving means that you're anchorless, right? That seems to me like we have to be conservative too. And so both of these things are pretty important. And all of you, all I can see is your phone numbers on here, except for Stephen and Jan. But I know all of you are conservative compared to somebody, and you are liberal compared to somebody else. I mean, we're all somewhere on that spectrum, me and you, all of us. So in 2008, I wrote a book, and I'm going to just show you the cover of it here. I wrote this during a political season, an election season. It's called Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White. And it's thoughts on religion, morality, and politics. And it followed up a book I wrote. My very first book I wrote years ago was this book called Confronting the Controversies. And in Confronting the Controversies, I took 8 controversial issues of our time, and I tried to understand them from the left and the right, or Democrat and Republican, or whatever the theological or ethical basis would be. I tried to understand it from both perspectives, and then tried to ask, how does Scripture inform how we look at these things? And recognize that on almost every issue, you could take certain scriptures and make a case for one side or the other. And so having done that, with humility, try to say, okay, here's where I stand today. It may not be where I'm going to stand tomorrow or 10 years from now. But as I understand things now, this is where I stand and why. And this is why I appreciate people who might be in a different place than I am. In Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White, part of what I was trying to say is at that time, I was hearing a lot of people say, well, there's the mushy middle, and there's the people who see gray everywhere, and all these, people with this ethic of seeing things in gray, and we got to see things in black and white. And there are some things that are black and white. I mean, abusing children is a black and white issue. It's always wrong. And cruelty is always wrong. And there's a host of other things that are just always wrong. Those are black and white issues. But it's interesting, when you start doing ethics, you pretty quickly find that there's a lot more gray than what you realize. So I just finished this week a book on the 10 Commandments for Random House Publishers. And I spent the last year working on this. And the one commandment that just seems really clear, on the last 6, they're all about loving our neighbor. And the one commandment that seems most clear, and everybody should stack hands on, is this. The commandments are numbered differently, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, but in the Methodist tradition, the 6th commandment is do not kill. And so that seems pretty clear, don't kill. And so when we start recognizing that there's some gray is when we go, well, what does that mean when it comes to self-defense? What does it mean when it comes to law enforcement? What does it mean when it comes to war and protecting people in war? Is killing always wrong? What does it mean when it comes to the death penalty? And so, some translations change it to you shall not murder, but the Hebrew is you shall not kill. And then Jesus goes on to make it even more clear, you're to love your enemy, and you're to turn the other cheek. And he reiterates, you're not supposed to kill. And yet we recognize very quickly that there's some gray in that commandment, do not kill. And that has to do at least with, for some people, self-defense, with some people who believe in just war, with what we do when it comes to the death penalty, those who would affirm the death penalty. And so, again, we recognize gray even the most, what seem to be the most clear-cut commandments. And so listening to and debating these things is what the rabbis did of old, and it's what the church has done. The fathers of the church did in working out their ethics, was to really try to debate, okay, what are the situations in which this may not apply? And what we find is that in most situations, there is some measure of gray. So I think about abortion as one of those, critical issues that we talk about a lot, and you as a legislature have had conversations about. And, the places where most people begin to recognize some gray there at least have to do with if a woman's life is in danger. Right? And so if her life is in danger and she might literally die, which is a very tiny fraction of the abortions that take place, then there might be some gray here in terms of whether abortion is wrong or not wrong. And then we begin to ask questions beyond that. My point is just that there is gray in almost every one of those kind of issues. There are some that are clearly black and white, but there is some that are gray, and most that are gray. And the capacity to listen and learn from each other is really important. Some people think seeing gray, so this gets to civil discourse. Some people think seeing gray is a mushy middle, or it's a sort of milk toasty kind of thing, or it's some people use the word moderate. Some of you might even use the word moderate. Often we think of that as a good thing, but when it comes to my faith, I don't want to be moderate in my faith. I don't want to have my faith in moderation. I want to be passionate. I want to be determined. I want to be committed. I want to be serious about my faith. I don't want to be a moderate when it comes to my faith, but I do want to be somebody who listens to people and tries to understand where they're coming from and demonstrates love in how I do this. And so I've advocated for something called the radical center. And that radical center is passionate, it's serious, it's deeply committed, but it's also standing in a place where I can recognize there's truth on the left and there's truth on the right, and I need to be willing to hear that to find the greatest possible truth. So that's an approach that we've tried to take at Church of the Resurrection. I have people who are, Tea Partiers, and I have people who are, left progressives. And what they've said is, I actually am a better Republican or Democrat, a better Christian, because I listen to other people and I've heard the truth from their side and their perspective. Going back to politics, one of my friends is a guy named John Ortberg, and some of you probably have read some of John's books. He's a pastor in California, and I love this guy. And he was the one who pointed out to me that among the 12 disciples, there were two, at least we know, who were absolute opposites when it came to their politics. So there was Simon the Zealot, and the Zealots believed that the Romans needed to be thrown out of the Holy Land, and if possible, or if necessary, use terrorism to do it. And then there was Matthew, the tax collector, who actually made his living by supporting the Roman occupation of the Holy Land. And so their politics were, extremely different from one another. And it'd be interesting to have been a fly on the wall and listen to them as they were walking, across the Galilee, and hear them debating politics, because they thought Jesus was going to be the king and, institute a new kingdom here on earth. They had very different political vantage points, and yet Jesus chose both of them, the zealot and the tax collector, to be his disciples. And I think that's possibly because they each had something important to bring to the conversation. And I think that's true of all of you. I don't know how many of you are Republicans or Democrats, but when we come to value each other and look at each other as human beings who have ideas that are important, and maybe your idea might help my idea be better, or my idea might help your idea. And if I can actually listen to you and treat you with respect and love, we might come up with better solutions than we would come up with in our polarized world when we're not doing that. And what I love about this, how many of you are on this call? Let's see, what do we have? There's 50 of you right now. Is that it sounds like that's what you're trying to do. And I love that. I think you're going to make our state a better state. John Wesley once said this, the founder of Methodism. He said, "Would to God that all party names and unscriptural phrases and forms which have divided the Christian world," and I realize we're talking about Kansas, not a Christian community, but have divided the Christian world, were forgot, and that we might all agree to sit down together as humble, loving disciples at the feet of our common master, to hear his word and to abide in his spirit, and to transcribe his life into our own. And I think that kind of spirit of humility and listening is really important. So I have a few other things, and I thought we might just open it up to questions and conversation. I was thinking about Jesus and what we learn from Jesus, and not all of this is Jesus. It goes back to the Hebrew Bible as well. And often these are things that are just affirmed in virtually every religion and secular humanism as well, but some basic ideas that should govern how we do politics. So, many of our folks in Kansas would claim to be people of faith. And if that's the case, our faith should be reflected in how we do politics. So here's some basic ones, and all of these. I'm just reminding you of these things. I think about the golden rule. It's very simple. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And I found in my congregation every election year, I would start having people forward the other political party, or saying things that weren't necessarily true, but they sounded true and they were meant to inflame people's passions. And so it used to be emails, now it's Facebook and Twitter and social media. And I would ask them, or I would say to our congregation, do you think that Jesus only meant the golden rule about everything but politics, or is it possible that he actually meant it about politics too? Is it possible the true nature of our faith is seen in how we practice our faith in the areas in which we're most divided? And so, this is one great example. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus says there's two great commandments: love God and love your neighbor. And so everything we do, we filter as people of faith through those two lenses. Is this helping me to love God more? Does this reflect my love of God? And does it reflect the love of my neighbor, which isn't about warm, fuzzy feelings, but about a desire to seek the best for my neighbor? And so Jesus says, just doesn't get any simpler than that. Love God and love your neighbor. And so our politics and how we practice politics and how we run political campaigns and all this should somehow be reflected in, our faith should be somehow reflected in these things. Paul says this, and this is a passage you might want to write down, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 29 through 31. And I love this passage. And Paul says this, let no evil talk come out of your mouth. And I want to pause there and say evil talk. The word for evil talk there is the Greek equivalent of the word putrid. So putrid is like that stuff the casserole you took in the Tupperware and it fell up behind the back seat and you didn't find it for 3 months and it's been putrefied. It's nasty and gross. Or the stuff in your refrigerator that when you open it, you realize I'm not even going to try to rescue this. I'm going to throw the Tupperware away and all because it's so nasty. Well, that's the word that Paul's using here. Let no putrid talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building others up as there is need, that your words may give grace to those who hear. And I want to pause there. The word grace means undeserved kindness. So your political opponent or the people in the other party in the legislature, they may not deserve your kindness, but Paul says you give it to them anyway. That's what grace is. So give grace to those who hear, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God with which you were marked with a seal for the day of redemption. And then this is the part I love, or another part I love. Put away from you all bitterness and wrath and anger and wrangling and slander, together with all malice. And be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ has forgiven you. So it doesn't say don't have great, meaningful debates about the issues that are at hand. We have to do that. That's how we resolve, problems. That's how we work together for common good, for the common good in our solutions. But when we do that, we don't do that with slander. We don't do that with malice. We don't do that with anger, with wrath, with bitterness, with wrangling, but instead with kindness, tenderheartedness, and forgiveness. And, this is just like the ethic just goes all the way through the New Testament. Philippians chapter 2, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. I mean, what would happen if and I think you all probably do this, but what would happen if I looked at that person in the other political party as better than myself, right? And look, not only, he says, to your own interest, but to the interest of others. So we're trying to figure out what's in it, what do they need in this? Or I think about 1 Corinthians 13, the great love chapter, or James, who says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. I mean, all of these things, and I love this, you've heard it before, but God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth in direct proportion to how much we should use them. And we listen more than we speak, and somehow that actually helps us be more effective in everything that we do. So in my own life, that looks like I have found there are issues about which I had really strong opinions, and I decided I would actually listen to people who held the opposite view. And I sat down with them and I asked them, what do you believe? And then why do you believe that? Or why do you hold that? And the more I listened and the more they talked, the more I found there was truth in what they were saying, or the more I understood with compassion why they held the view that they were holding. And it moderated my view in some way, or it led me to say, okay, wait, there is something here that I need to address in my own thinking when it comes to their concerns. And I think that's part of what at least many of us are hoping you all are doing in the legislature, is on our behalf, being able to really listen, to befriend one another. And, Stephen, you and I and Jan and Patty talked about this, the old days when we all hear about them. I don't know if they were really this way or not, but where the legislators in Kansas got together and they had, soft drinks or hard drinks or whatever they drank after the legislative sessions. And they were each other's friends. They connected with each other as human beings. And in doing that, you can't just dismiss what somebody else says when you're looking at each other as human beings, children of God, your brothers and sisters you're to care for. So the things that strike me is trying to listen more than we speak, trying to understand where somebody else is coming from, walking in their shoes. I've found my views on critical issues sometimes changed when I walked in somebody else's shoes. And all of a sudden I thought, wow, I never saw it that way before. And it actually changed my views of things. And practicing the things that Jesus talked about, loving your neighbors, you love yourself, loving even your enemy. So I'll tell you, Stephen mentioned this, and then I'm going to be quiet and see if there's any questions or comments or conversation. But this fall at Church of the Resurrection, in order to try to close the gap between civility in our community, we're launching a kind of an election campaign ourselves. And we are having yard signs printed up in the thousands that will have comments about, these kind of scriptures on, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus really meant it, or, be kind to one another, or, taking these kind of scriptures. And we're going to be placing them, in the islands where all of the other election signs are. We're going to be putting them right in the middle of that to remind people, during this season, these are the things, these values are the things that matter most. So let's do our politics this way. We're going to be producing social media advertising that we're going to run on social media with people, listening to people from both sides and allowing them to see, allowing us to see that there's a Republican and a Democrat who actually care about each other. I'm pretty sure we can find that, and to be able to really challenge our people and the people in our community and in the state of Kansas and in Missouri that, these are our values. And I think Kansans do this really well. I think, we're not only geographically in the middle of the country, but we're also people who have the capacity to understand both the left and the right and to try to find that common good and to care for one another. So that's a campaign we're launching this fall, and I'm really excited about that. And so I'm going to stop there and see if there's any of this that I've shared you'd like to talk about, or any, where we go from here.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Adam, I am really excited about that campaign also. And it's one of the things that I thought about. Are there other entities, churches or others, that might want to share a different idea? See if we come up with, are there more signs? Is there a congregation in Manhattan or wherever that might want to do the same thing? And how do we get kind of those ideas and signs there? If there's a social media piece, if there's some different, has the Methodist Church looked at doing that more broadly? Are there ways we might be able to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So we're looking to prepare as much of this as possible during the summer, and then be able to have it available for other churches to use and just sort of publicly put it out there and see, we'll have the PDFs so that people can have the signs printed themselves in their communities, or we could print, large quantities of them that people could have available. They could order them from us. We can send them out. And the social media piece is the same thing. I think we'll try to prepare those in a generic way so that they could be used by people across. Really, we're starting here in Kansas, but our hope is that this is something that spreads across the country. And we're committed to doing this every 2 years through the year 2030. And so we're hoping it starts here small, and then it gradually grows 2 years later, larger and larger and larger.
Let's say I'd like to order some of those signs. What would I do to reach out to you and do that, or get a call?
Yeah, I don't know yet because we're still developing this. So I would say by July, we'll have a pretty good handle on that. But so if you wouldn't mind, you and Jan just check back with me, and I would love to share that information with you all in the legislature, and have your communities be doing the same thing. I think
I think they shouldn't sell them to politicians.
Okay, hang on real quick.
Sell them to churches.
Sydney,
Yes. Am I talking?
you are talking. I'm
Oh, I
sorry,
thought
because
I
I
was
unmuted
muted.
people so that people can,
Well, I thought
Yeah.
I was muted.
And
yes, as I was
Pastor
saying,
April, did you have a question by chance?
Well, yeah, I was wondering if you would sell them to politicians or if it just would be through churches.
Yeah, and that's a great question. We really haven't answered that question yet. So I think, part of what we want to do is certainly make them available to churches. But I don't know how many I don't know that it would be. I don't know how that worked for politicians. I really think it's civil organizations and groups, and most of these will be scriptures. So they'd relate to probably churches in particular.
Jesus wants to like me.
okay.
Put my
Adam?
signs.
Yes.
You have changed your views over the years. In all the time I've known you, I said, well, I used to think this way. Now you've used it this way. Is there a tipping point for you, or what has caused you many times to be able to change your outlook on different issues?
Yeah, it really is largely about listening to people and hearing their stories, and then looking at that through the lens of Scripture. So again, it's possible to argue from Scripture, multiple different positions. Like when it comes to the death penalty, for instance, that's something that my views changed on over time. And you could clearly make a case for the death penalty from Scripture, and you could clearly make a case using other scriptures against the death penalty. And I have great, most of the Corcoran family lost both a father. Mindy Corcoran lost her father and her son in the shooting at the Jewish Community Center a number of years ago. I officiated at the double funeral for these two, and while I personally opposed the death penalty, they were not, they were in a place where they weren't sure they were opposed to the death penalty when it came to this person. And I felt very supportive of them, and was in the courtroom during this whole trial and everything else, or not during the whole trial, during parts of the trial. So compassion is one of those key indicators. But for me, say on the death penalty, it had to do with understanding the number of cases that are where people are wrongly convicted, and it's maybe around 1% And 1% of, if you think about just convictions nationally, there's 2.3 million people in prison right now, and that would mean 23,000 people in prison who were wrongly convicted. And one of those is one of my associate pastors who was convicted of a murder and was in prison for over 20 years. And so, when you hear those stories and you have a chance to know more about it, you go, wait a minute, maybe my views change. And but even then, to have the humility to say, this is where I came from, this is where I'm at, and these are the scriptures that tie into this, and the reasons why I hold this view, but I understand why someone else holds another view. Same-sex relationships is another one of those where it's a hot button issue in the church today, and pastoring a church of 20,000 people, it's hearing people's stories, and it's understanding the historical and cultural, how history and culture form and shape scripture, and scripture emerges in a particular historical and cultural context that leads me to have a view different than I did, say, 20 years ago. So I think there's something about, again, it's listening, it's trying to understand, it's all of those things play an important role. And I've had people say sometimes, well, you've changed. I'm like, thank God. We should all be changing. If you're growing, you're changing. You should be, if you're not changing, then I'm going to suggest you're not reading, you're not studying, you're not growing. Growing means changing. It's maturing. It's seeing things differently. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And sometimes my positions have become more conservative, and sometimes they become more progressive. And so by virtue of listening and trying to understand both the intersection between scripture and ethics and life and human beings, and seeing people as people, and sometimes the cultural situation changes, which leads to maybe a different view that I had, just like words change their meaning over time because the culture and the way words are used changes. So yeah, but I think it largely has to do with both a deepening understanding of scripture, but also a compassion and concern for human beings. So I want to encourage all of you to be changing too, maturing, growing, whatever that means in terms of your positions, that we're all hopefully maturing and changing, seeing things differently.
So then inevitably when we change, an opponent may call us flip-flop or that we're waffling.
Yeah. I think the flip-flop is a legitimate question when the only reason I'm changing my position is because I held my finger up to the wind and noticed that there were more votes to be had if I changed my position here or there. So if you have a serious ethical or moral issue or concern, or a political issue in terms of how we resolve problems, and the only thing you're asking is, where will I get more votes? And you change because of that, I think that doesn't reflect always integrity. Now you're in a different position, you're representing people, and so you have to take into account that. But as a pastor, if I change my position because I think more people will like me better, I'm going to lose my soul. And there are times I'm going to preach sermons that I know I'm going to get a lot of angry emails about, and I'm going to try to preach them in a way that's compassionate and kind and gentle and humble, and so people might actually hear them. But I can't simply ask, what do the majority of my members think, and then I'm going to preach that. I have to ask, what is true as best as I can understand it? How does Scripture speak to it? What are the real underlying issues? And so, I would say flip-flopping is when I'm changing just to get more votes or to do whatever the popular thing is, versus actually asking, what do I think is the right thing? After I've listened to all sides, what do I think is the right thing? And that means sometimes you all will make hard calls and you'll make decisions that are unpopular. And it's even possible that you get voted out of office if you've done the thing that you think is right. And that didn't align with where many of your people were. And I recognize that as a pastor. There are times where I preach sermons and I thought, I hope I say this in a way that people will hear it. And I hope I've built up enough leadership capital after being their pastor all these years, but it's possible I won't have a job after this. And that's okay. I think this is one of those things where I have to speak.
Pastor Adam, you speak on a lot of things, and each sermon can hit this. I know I was lucky to happen to be in town for the opening of the year in January, where you talked about some of these messages, and there may have been other times where I haven't caught it. But there was a video that you played that had generations, and it was interesting to me to see how generations in political issues kind of lined up. Are there some things like that that you found? And then I might have a request. If that video is available, just that clip, maybe we could distribute that to our group that's on the call later.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So we said that we surveyed 500 people. So the sermon series was what would Jesus say, and in that we were asking, what would younger adults what questions would younger adults have for Jesus if they could sit with him? And so we did a survey with 500 Gen Z and millennial members of our congregation, and we asked them, what are the 20, of these 20 issues, what are the ones that are most important to you? What are the ones you wish you could ask Jesus? What would you, what do you think about this, Jesus? And then in addition to the survey data, which largely lined up with data we find across the entire US, where young adults, millennials, and Gen Z have questions or concerns. But in addition to that, we then sat down with a group of about 12 young adults. These were young people aged 22 to 33, I think, and asked them to tell their stories. So, Stephen, I've got the one intro clip, which is about a minute long, and then I've got probably 25 clips. Actually, each week not 25, there's probably 10 of those clips, because each week, whatever the issue was, we would put another clip together. I'm happy to send you all those clips. So, as we were talking about that, as we know, young adults see things many times very differently than their parents do. What's interesting, I find, is that many times the young adult questions and their perspectives seem to me that they lined up more closely with Jesus than maybe some of us who are older, my age and older. And they were really serious about this, but they were also frustrated because they felt like older adults didn't understand, they didn't care. And so, some of that we can say, well, those are just young people. They just, they'll change over time, and they might. But some of them are things that they're really deeply concerned about. And I think part of what I told our congregation was, if we don't care what young adults are saying, we won't be here 50 years from now. Those young adults will be in another church somewhere else, but they won't be at this church because we didn't listen and hear about the issues that really matter to them and ask, how does our faith speak into those issues? And I would say the same is true probably for, you all have to be wrestling with the same thing when you're talking about young Republicans and young Democrats and how they see things differently than, say, older Republicans and older Democrats do. And so, I'd be happy to share that with you. It was our January sermon series, if any of you are interested. And on our website, cor.org, Church of the Resurrection, cor.org, you can find all 4 of these sermons, and we kind of took them in order that they raised the concerns, top 4 concerns.
So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Kind of on that topic, you mentioned one of the books, Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White. There's probably 2 or 3 that are somewhat relevant. If somebody's interested in that book, same website?
Although that's available from Amazon. So you could get it'll be faster and cheaper probably from Amazon than from our place. And you can get it on there. I think they're all available on Kindle and Audible. And so the 3 that I might mention, well, there's probably 4 or 5. I'll just mention them briefly. Confronting the Controversies was my first book and deals with about 8 controversial topics, 7 or 8. Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White has about 25 of these questions, both theologically and ethically. There was a book called Half Truths that I wrote that people might find interesting, things that Christians often say, but they're only sort of half true. And then a book related to the Bible called Making Sense of the Bible. And it goes through, the first half is a first-year seminary course on the Bible, its complexity, how it was written, how it was canonized. And then the second half is about, questions that people have about the Bible, and helps people really dig into those questions related to science and faith and a whole host of other things, including ethical issues that we talk about today.
So thanks. I'll try to quit dominating. If somebody has a question, I don't know how many minutes we have left of your time, but if we...
Yeah, I'm okay for about 10 more minutes. I was going to mention those, in case anybody's interested, those topics that we did. These were the topics that they named, and the first one was political polarization. So young adults, Gen Z and millennials, deeply concerned about political polarization. That was the first sermon, but it was the 4th of the most important issues for them. A second was mental health. And so a deep concern and feeling like we, as the rest of society, wasn't taking seriously the mental health concerns.
Oh,
Here called snowflakes and other things, mocking them as opposed to taking seriously mental health concerns. And their generation is one where they've seen a lot of suicides. And so that was another one. Diversity and inclusion was another. And so this was the second most frequently asked question or concern they listed, was inclusion and diversity. And again, corporations, they're recognizing if we don't care about that. Communities. I was on the Overland Park long-range planning team, and we were looking at a 20 or 30 year forward look for Overland Park. Part of what we recognized on that team was that if we're not serious about changing, Overland Park and having it be more diverse and inclusive, our children, none of our children are going to live in Overland Park. They're going to want to live in other places that are more, or, most of them are going to want to live in places that are more inclusive. That's such a high value and I find that with my kids. And then the last one was climate change. And this was a huge issue, as you all know, for young people. And when we dismiss them as opposed to listening and hearing, we guarantee that they're not going to be interested in where we are, or who we are in the future.
Adam, you talk about the issues that young people are concerned about. And a lot of times we, whether it's politicians or as business people or pastors, we get comfortable knowing what we know. And I know that you do a lot of research, and then from that, you'd be able to build a sermon series developed to that. I would think that also for us in our jobs as public servants, that we need to be able to listen more to the concerns of the people, not get a survey out to worded such to be able to back what we already know, but be able to truly find some ideas and then explore innovative ways and working with others to find solutions from a governmental standpoint.
Jan, that is really important. The nuancing of language, because we've all done these. We can nuance a survey to get the answers that we want, as opposed to, and we nuance our language in a lot of ways that gives away what we believe versus actually being open to hearing where people are at. And so I think that's really important. Hey, one thing I was going to mention to you, to your group, related to guns. So, this is another hot button issue. When I surveyed the entire congregation on hot button issues 2 years ago, this was one of the top ones. And so, I preached a series of sermons every 2 years. There's a series of 4 to 6 sermons I'm going to preach about ethical issues and asking questions about them. And in that sermon, we surveyed the congregation when it came to gun rules, laws, regulations. I went and met with the people who owned, a couple of our members who owned Centerfire, shooting range. And, so really trying to have kind of an objective, hearing people from on both sides. What was interesting was the vast majority of our people who were gun owners supported or were in favor of some basic things that almost everybody agreed upon. I mean, the lowest number was like 65% supported. And some of these things, it was like 98%. And these were people, who owned guns and cared about guns and wanted to protect their rights, and at the same time said, but this just makes sense to us. And so when we looked at that, we're often afraid that we're going to go down a slippery slope, or we're caving into the other side or something, as opposed to, I think most people are looking for, hey, let's have some common sense conversations about these things and listen to each other. And at least at Resurrection, I found that was the case. I see Stephanie Sharp has given the links in the chat to some of the other books that I have. And When Christians Get It Wrong is one that I really appreciate too. I'm glad you put that on there, and Why is another one. And anyway, so take a look at those notes that are on there, and some of those might be helpful to be able to link to those on Amazon, I think.
Anybody else have questions? Stephen?
I'll always have a few more, and I'd encourage folks, like I threw in the chat, if you've got an idea for a message that we might use here or somewhere else on a sign, or a social media campaign, or things that we can do, we'd really like to have those collective creative juices. Pastor Adam, are there some other things along with the signs that are happening towards the campaign and the civility message?
We were really firing this up when the coronavirus came along, and now the last month, our whole energy has been focused on how do we support healthcare workers? What are we doing for low-income people in Kansas City? How are we supporting our own members who are scared? And we've lost 3 people to COVID-19 so far, and and I'm guessing this is true for you all as well, but so much of our focus is turned to that. So this will be coming back online, but it's probably going to be mid-May when we're really firing that team back up. So I will definitely, this good thing we're going to have going on.
I missed that last.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we'll fire this team back up in mid-May, and we will keep you apprised on other things that we're going to be doing. So I'll let you and Jan know, here's what's happening, here's what we're doing, and seeing if there's things that you all were interested in, we can create them generic for the legislature, whatever. So, but I think for you all to be able to play a leading role in this is awesome. Just among yourselves to show us, because when you met with me, I came away from that meeting so encouraged. I just thought, how awesome is this, that you all that we associate with, polarization and conflict are actually working to address that and maybe modeling something for the rest of us. I just think it's awesome. I really, really commend you for that.
Well, thank you. And it was energizing for all of us. And to the group that we have, the vision that we started to see was, as we have our group in the legislature and we're in the middle of the political issues and the challenges that are there, but the people that we touch, we think they really do want something different. And if we could start with a Church of the Resurrection, and you had 29,500 people attend last weekend,
Right.
That's a lot of people that we reach right there. But then if we got to the Methodist Church, and it's great, I see 2 Lutheran pastors in the corner, and thank you for engaging. Because our real desire is to serve the kingdom. And as long as we stay focused on that, and as long as we are able to stay focused on the Lord's Prayer of serving thy kingdom, not my kingdom,
Yes.
that's really what I think we all know that it's about. And that rises above what we have to offer from the political solutions that are also important to the day, but not priority. So I just got really excited about how could that start to come together and really quietly but firmly demand what you're saying, that we look at what's the issue, how do we meet our needs, and how do we do it together. So I hope we find a few other folks to help us in that effort, and that's the purpose of today's call.
That'd be awesome. And I'll let you know, all of this campaign that we're doing is under the auspices of Love Your Neighbor. So we just feel like, who can disagree with that? It's pretty hard to disagree. And both Moses and Jesus said this is important. So we're hoping that people can stack hands on that and say, you know what, I'm going to love my neighbor. And my neighbor is the Republican, the Democrat, the independent, the person I disagree with about almost everything, but they're still my neighbor, and I'm still called to love them.
Adam, we had a video. There was a man and a woman who were at opposite extremes. I think politically, they didn't like each other, and then they got to know each other, and they would break bread together. Do you remember the name of them so we could look it up on YouTube, or we can find it?
Yeah, I don't remember. I thought you guys also had a video like that, or somebody that spoke to you.
Yeah, you're right. You may be right. Did we, Stephen?
I was reading Laura's question in chat.
I'm sorry. Well, let's go to Laura.
Okay. And it's in the chat, Adam, if she's muted.
Okay, let's check. I'm not seeing it. Can you read it to me?
I just wondered, yeah, Adam, I just wondered, we can all be impatient with change at times, and we really desire that this civil discourse effort would take off and more people would join. And so I just wondered, what do you think a successful civil discourse outcome looks like in 1, 2, 3 years?
That's a really great question. And I don't know that we've set goals for, and I think you're talking about a 2-year, I think your 1 and 3 years is a great idea. Our hope is that to the degree we can find a way to measure polarization, we would find less polarization and increased understanding and appreciation for people who had different views. I thought it was interesting in the last presidential campaign in, I forget, one of the debates, maybe a couple of debates, they asked a question, and I don't know that the people answered it well. It was Trump and Clinton, but what do you value about your opponent?
Oh, yeah.
And I just thought, now that really is a great opportunity to think about, what do I value about Republicans, or what do I value about Democrats, or what do I value about the person who's running against me, for office. So that ability to model that and to express that, I think, becomes really important too. But we're working on that. I don't know. And Laura, if you have some suggestions on things you think would be a good measure of that, or Stephen or the rest of you, I think that'd be awesome. I'm open to thoughts, ideas, things you think could.
Okay.
Also, there's consultants here that I'm not having to pay for to get information from. So please, Pat, anything you think might be helpful for us, we'd love to hear that.
All right, I'll think on that. Thank you.
We need to let Adam go. He has a Seder to attend.
That's right. I will tell you this kind of ties in. So one of my best friends, a very good friend here in Kansas City, is Rabbi Art Nematoff. And so we're doing a virtual Seder because he can't have his normal Seder dinner. And so Levon and I are sitting at the table with all of our ingredients for the Passover, and joining his family and joining other families from the synagogue. And one of the things that I've found, he and I are a really great picture of this. I found traveling with him So we've traveled to the Holy Land. We've traveled to, we've just done a lot of things together. Listening to his stories has made me love him so much. And I tell you what, I would do anything to stand up for him or fight for him or, be in his corner. And, he's Jewish and I'm Christian. And I think he makes me a better Christian and I make him a better Jew. And so there's something about that is kind of what we're talking about right here. As I think you're a better Republican when you listen to Democrats, and you're a better Democrat when you listen to Republicans, and you love each other well. So thank you all for letting me hang out with you today. It was great to be with you.
Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. God bless.
Stephen?